us here in Borno, suicide bombing is not a sign of strength on the part of the Boko Haram, no. It's a sign of weakness. The Nigerian military was able to accomplish in the past couple of weeks in the Sambisa forest, accomplishment that we did not got in the past 3 years. Because the Sambisa forest is an impregnable fortress to the Boko Haram insurgents.
Now, that was the governor of Borno State in Nigeria speaking of the alleged defeat of Boko Haram in the area. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, as mentioned earlier, Nigeria released nearly 500 suspected Boko Haram militants, including both children and the elderly last weekend. The suspects are to be rehabilitated and then rejoin society, as 4 judges have heard hundreds of cases in Nigeria's biggest ever mass trial. But there has been some controversy over the trial, especially when it comes to the effectiveness of the judiciary, drawing mixed reactions from the population.
But if they are not caught, they are just mere suspects, just see them by the roadside and you arrested them to be Boko Haram, it's unfair.
Like the mass trial, I for one, I'm afraid because I lose confidence in the judiciary.
There have been flaws in our security system. The police don't have the way without. Look at those that have been taken to court, for instance. There are not enough evidences. Police arrest before they begin to get evidence. They take you to court when we're not having sufficiency of evidence and make a mockery of our judicial system.
And now to offer further insights into Boko Haram and Africa's fight against terrorism, I have expert guests standing by. In Lagos, Aliyu Umar, security analyst and former officer in the Nigerian Army. In Johannesburg, Richard Shalin, independent Africa analyst. And with me in Nairobi, security and conflict transformation expert, Dr. Mustafa Ali. Thank you all very much for joining in on the program. Aliyu Umar in Nigeria, let me start off with you there because you've been watching this Boko Haram insurgency now in Nigeria since 2009. Let's start with the latest attempts of abduction of the about 100 schoolgirls, again in Yobe State, allegedly by Boko Haram. It seems the Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria is far from over. So what exactly is the current state there?
The unfortunate incident of the girls in Yobe is, as it is, a reminder of what happened to the Chibok girls. We could say insurgency, as we know it, has been gradually scaled down by military operations in Nigeria, but then that's just one aspect of the challenge. For now, the challenge also lies with order, security and law enforcement agencies to have churned out a blueprint post Chibok girls abduction for running our schools. What's the blueprint, for example, for having a school, particularly on areas I want to call the out fringes of Borno State?
If I can just interrupt you, Aliyu, for just a minute, because the Nigerian military has spent the last 2 years saying that actually they have defeated Boko Haram. You're talking about it being gradually scaled down, not actually defeated. So why is this so difficult?
Defeating an adversary tactically in military operations cannot basically apply to the problem we have at hand. If you have defeated them tactically, does not mean you have defeated them socially.
Mustafa Ali, though, the officer there is talking about there are loopholes that need to be amended. If those loopholes are not amended, then it is not possible to eradicate Boko Haram. In your view, though, as a security and conflict expert, what's going on here?
Technically speaking, Beatrice, it is not possible to eliminate any of the terrorist organization. You may diminish and degrade their abilities to terrorize, to fight, but you cannot eradicate them. So Nigeria announcing that it had defeated Boko Haram was not correct. The United States of America has not been able to eliminate the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. Since 9/11, not a single terrorist organization has been defeated, and yet trillions of dollars have been used to actually fight these groups militarily. Now, this tells you that the approach that has been used all along has been wrong or is not sufficient to really deal with the issue of these terrorist groups, and Boko Haram falls within that category.
If we're talking about it is not possible to eradicate an insurgency or a terrorism group, though, but yet we're seeing that Boko Haram has actually been gradually scaled down, very much now confined to the northeast. So what does the Nigerian government have to do? How is it going to be eradicated? Will it be eradicated?
Yeah, militarily, let me correct it. Militarily, it's not possible to eliminate any terrorist group. What can really degrade, diminish, and to a point eliminate a terrorist group would be a combination of military approach and ideological pushback, where all the reasons that gave that group into, to come into being in the first place are actually addressed. And so it's going to take a much, much longer time for Nigeria to really eliminate Boko Haram, and maybe never.
Richard Shelling, is that how you're viewing this as well, that it is now becoming quite difficult to deal effectively with Boko Haram?
We have to look at it in the broader context as well. In the case of, even in terms of terrorist groups, there are various types of terrorist groups. You have political terrorists, you have ideological, those that are religious / ideological. And it's really very difficult to actually eliminate a terrorist group as such, and as the previous guests have mentioned, it had to have a military approach, you have to have a structural, an ideological pushback, and also you have to look at the underlying causes of what leads people to be attracted to these groups in the first place, and what are the causes, what are the social causes, what are the political situation or the social context, in as much as you may defeat certain fighters, you may kill certain fighters, you may have joint strikes, but at the end of the day, if the underlying causes are not addressed, then it's just a vicious circle that keeps happening. We saw that with Al-Qaeda in North Africa, how they went into hiding post-2012 in Mali when the French attacked, and we've seen them coming back, regrouping stronger than before. And just it shows that military force alone is not the answer.
Right. Aliyu Umar, in Lagos, though, this is not just enough. The military option alone is not enough. But let's look at the root causes, as Richard Shelling there is mentioning. What exactly is driving or still driving Boko Haram? What are the root causes of this conflict?
Basically, in our country, the first root cause that we can ascribe to what they're doing is political exclusion. We need inclusive governance. That is being worked on. Other than that, I do not really see any sensible cause behind Boko Haram or ascribe any cause to what they're doing. Most of what they do, if we bring it to the table and decide to use what you may call a superior argument, they just don't, it just doesn't carry what they do. But what I want to tell you, and what is straightforward from the ground here, is this. Until other security law enforcement agencies have a blueprint for anti-terrorism or counter-terrorism, as the case may be, the military can only do just what they are doing and still have their efforts relegated. We have a civil populace that really doesn't know how to protect itself, and probably very highly too, the law enforcement agencies that should be protecting them don't seem to know how to. Bombs are still going off in mosques, children are still being abducted, while the military can have whatever the military has achieved amounts to naught until we begin to tell our civil populace and our civil law enforcement officers how to protect us.
Right. Richard Shelling, though, one of the issues that the Nigerian government has embarked on, or the Nigerian military, is this reintegration of defectors, so to call them, into society again. Is this the way to go?
Well, for any program to work, there needs to be willingness on both sides. If I may just, it's all good that the government put in a rehabilitation program for ex-fighters. However, is the project being funded well enough? Are the fighters going to be given the right services, the right, because they have to be radicalized, remove the ideology, and also there's a lot of issues such as reintegration into society. How does this community will perceive them once they get back into society? All those issues need to be looked at and looked into before prioring the government coming out and saying, okay, we have a rehabilitation and this is going to help with the situation. Because there's need willingness on the part of the ex-fighters and willingness on government, and also there need to be commitment. We've seen in many other countries, DDRs, demobilization projects do not work is because either there's no commitment on part of government to continue with the project, because it's a long-term effort, it's not a very short-term, and it shouldn't be seen as such. And there's also a lot of resources that need to be put into that, and a lot of issues as well. So all of these need to be carefully taken into careful consideration prior to commencing the project as such.
Aliyu Umar, though, if one of the issues is an issue of inclusivity or issues of socio-economic agenda for the Boko Haram insurgents here, what exactly is the Nigerian government, though, doing to rectify that anomaly, if you can call it that?
The economic agenda, as you put it itself, is an end. Something adds up to bring about this economic agenda. For now, the cocktail of challenges and problems we face are not even being given the required attention. We are being split over so many things, a la democracy, that we've lost focus. There is need for an economic agenda. There is need to give these people some quality of life. Yes, there is a de-radicalization process going on, which is meant to bring them and mainstream them back into normal living, but that's not really where the problem is. If I should speak as someone who has native ability of the northeastern region, part of this country, I can tell you that so many loopholes are left agape. The same loopholes these people crept in through, the military was able to flush them out territorially, does not mean the war is won. Post-Chibok girls, what were the lessons learned? How have they been applied? Nothing was learned, nothing is being applied, and that's why we had this sorry event happen some few days ago.
Dr. Mustafa, if we look at the situation, though, unfolding, and Aliyu talks about some loopholes that need to be closed off so that this problem is sorted out. What kind of loopholes are we looking at here, though?
Yeah, and you know, I understand Aliyu's frustrations, is that the lessons learned that he's talking about from the Chibok girls, you know, nobody seems to, in Nigeria, seems to be, at least from what we know, to be addressing the weaknesses, what led to the capture or kidnap of the Chibok girls, and how has the military and the Nigerian government and the communities tried to address that issue. And so, you know, nothing learned so far, and we still see more girls being kidnapped. Why is that so, when we are told that, in fact, the Nigerian army has obliterated Boko Haram at Camp Zero in Sambisa? Now, the issue here is, Beatrice, is that there seem to be a prioritization of the military approach more than the other approaches that will need to then to address this challenge. So that includes the loopholes you're talking about, exclusion of the communities, and even in the just engagement with communities to try and defeat Boko Haram, and to address the very reasons that gave rise to Boko Haram in the first place. And that is groups in the north feeling very much excluded. The issue of education between the north and the south, and the distribution of wealth, positions, is something that I believe, Ali, you can talk better about. But those are some of the challenges that are facing the people who are living in the north, including very bad leadership and governance from their own leaders in the north.
Aliyu Umar in Lagos, let me get your thoughts on Abubakar Shekau, because there have been constant reports that he may not be alive, conflicting reports of whether he's alive or he's not alive. And there's a bounty that's been put on his head by the Nigerian government, previously by the US government. Can you touch a bit for us about that. Where exactly is Abubakar Shekau? Is he alive? Is he not alive? And will this bounty situation work?
Honestly, I must be frank with you. I don't care where Shekau is, whether he's alive or dead. What is most pressing for me right now is how to secure schoolgirls and villages, how to make them less attractive to these terrorists. Yes, we are rehabilitating, we are reorienting those of them that have given terrorism up, but what about those who haven't given terrorism up? How can we make our innocent civil populace a bit more less attractive and difficult targets? Shekau could be anywhere, and I promise you if he drops dead right now, another will take his place. So for me, it's not about the Shekau or the no Shekau of it. It's about sending my security law enforcement agencies a wake-up cry, not even a call. On 2019 Earth, they are not doing enough.
Dr. Mustafa Ali, though, this whole Shekau situation, though, I mean, there have been a lot of conflicting reports on what, exactly is up with him. Does the government, the Nigerian government, though, really have the credible information as to where exactly Shekau is or if exactly he's alive?
In military doctrines around the world, you do not declare a person dead, an enemy dead, until you confirm that that person is dead through DNA and actually assembling that person or having that person, a body out there.
Do you think, though, having a bounty on his head will enable, his capture? And why has he eluded the government for so long?
It could, but what happens is when governments, having a bounty, whether it's $5 million, $10,000, and that, what it does is that it increases the availability of human intelligence, the so-called humans, and it also extends the search for terrorists from just the security agencies to the public, so that the public can also give information. But the issue of bounties as a checkered track record, the 10 largest bounties that have ever been given by the United States of America and others, including that of Ayman al-Zawahiri, these guys are still around,
right.
and nobody has claimed those bounties, or these guys have not been killed, or they've not been found.
Richard Shenin, what do you think, though, is the best way to tackle this Boko Haram issue? What will it take to finally win that war against Boko Haram?
Well, for me, I believe that to win the fight against Boko Haram, or to, firstly, if we look at the history of how lots of terrorist groups have been neutralized, is by bringing them to the table and having a negotiated agreement. However, in the case, it's been clear that Boko Haram has, any of its leaders are not prepared to come to the table, as is in the case with most transnational ideological terrorist group. I would say the best way to counter this is to, in addition to a military approach, is to look at the other issues in the Nigerian context, look at the social issues, and now it's like the aim is to prevent people from joining the group, is to push back against the ideology, to look at the social consequences, and also to look at Boko Haram operates in 3 different countries. So also the porous borders and the borders causes an issue in that the group can very easily operate in very different regions, as been seen in the past couple of years. And I would say they would need more information sharing among the different security forces and army in Nigeria, but also regionally as well. There needs to be more information sharing and a greater approach, rather than a competing approach that who can defeat Boko Haram and which country can do so, rather have a concerted effort.
Right. Aliyu Umar, just your final comment on this, because you've talked about loopholes that need to be sealed. So what do you think would be your best way, as a former military officer, what would be your best way to tackle Boko Haram?
To tackle Boko Haram today in Nigeria, our law enforcement agencies must begin to exploit the low-hanging fruits. We can talk about other macro aspects, policy aspects that will happen in the long term. But what are these low-hanging fruits? First and foremost, we must understand that things like policing have to be different in the Northeast. You cannot police the Northeast the way you police Lagos. So what is the narrative? What is the counter-terrorism narrative for police in the Northeast. Immigration, the borders cannot be manned the way we man the borders in Lagos. What is the narrative? How can we protect these communities? What can the National Orientation Agency do to make sure they sensitize people to terrorism, its causes and the dangers? If we have to go into those communities and speak Kanuri, so be it for the National Orientation Agencies. These talks about policies and what have you are important, but they are not immediate. What I'm talking about today is immediate now. These are the low-hanging fruits that can now create the leverage or the platform from which we go further. We are not seeming to have learned anything post-Chibok girls.
Right.
And only God knows if we continue like this, how many more schools will be taken.
Aliyu Umar, we'll leave it there for the moment, and thank you very much for your insights from Lagos. And that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights. In Lagos, Aliyu Umar, security analyst and former officer in the Nigerian Army. In Johannesburg, Richard Shalin, independent Africa analyst, and with me in Nairobi, security and conflict transformation expert Dr. Mustafa Ali. Remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And you tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall. Goodbye.